Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, everyone. Great. Should we wait for anybody else to join?
Yes, sir, some students are still joining.
Sure.
Yes, sir. We'll start in 2 minutes. First with your intro, then you can proceed.
Sounds good.
Hi, guys. My name is Akanksha Kushwaha.
And my name is Rishabh Jain.
Thank you all for joining today at this webinar on exploring career options, Webdev and DevRel. In today's times, when the career choices are endless, selecting from the best career options can become a hassle. With the advanced use of technology and growing industrial and educational sectors, the demand for skills has no limits. And today, we will be exploring some of the career options, WebDev and DevRel. For that, we are having Ashwin sir with us today to clear all your doubts.
Ashwin sir is currently a senior software engineer in developer relations at Egan Solutions and has 8+ years of experience in the field. Sir has volunteered as an editorial associate at Towards Data Science and a writer at Free Code Camp. Sir also has multiple projects involving fields like web development, machine learning, etc. We are hoping for an interactive session ahead. In case of any query, post them in the chat box and get them clear. Over to you, sir.
Hey, thank you both for introducing me. That was lovely. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Yeah, I'm Ashwin, and I'm a software developer and tech blogger. And I'm really excited to get to interact with you all. So let me just quickly share my screen because I've just prepared some slides for things to just be a little more structured and to understand what we're talking about. So I'll just quickly open that in a second. Yeah, I hope you can see my screen here. Welcome to this webinar once again on breaking into the tech industry. And just before we get started, I want to show you the agenda for today's session. So firstly, just a quick short introduction about what work I do, just to set the context and give you a little background for you to ask me any questions that you may have later on during the webinar. And next, we will also sort of discuss some of the career options that await you in tech. Some of the titles that you may have heard of are full stack developer, front-end developer, back-end engineer, DevOps, technical writer, and also developer advocate. So what do all these roles even mean, right? Thirdly, what do I learn, right? That's the next two sections, which we will primarily focus during this webinar. What skills are valuable and in demand? And there may be some of you that feel like, is programming even for me, right? What are some of the most effective learning techniques that you can use to find out and hopefully quickly learn, right? So all of this information is going to help you create a profile that will put you in the spotlight when targeting companies. And for the next two sections, I will focus primarily on like what parameters do you need to evaluate job offers, right? How do you know if a certain company is the right one or not, right? And finally, some tips on leveling up, like what should you care about, be it promotions or be it taking up additional responsibilities, or even let's say aiming for jobs that pay you more money, right? So all of that. And towards the end, we'll have some time to answer questions or doubts or anything else that you feel that I may have missed, which I should have spoken about. Right? So I hope you're excited as I am. Let's get started. All right, so here's me. Just a quick intro. I graduated in the year 2014 with a degree in computer science and engineering and began my programming journey as a front-end engineer. And then I sort of quickly transitioned within a year to full stack web development. And then for several years, I've been working with both startups and big corporates to help them launch, modernize, and scale their applications. And in the midst of all this, I actually took a career break that lasted for almost 2 years. And during this time, I did a lot of community work, technical blogging, hosting meetups and workshops on programming, etc. And I continue doing that even after my career break as well. And in the year 2020, I joined eGen, a cloud and data engineering company based out of Chicago. I joined them as a developer relations engineer, which I will be talking about. It's a very unique role that sits between product and software engineering and marketing as well. A quick question for you guys. Did you or any of you do any programming at all before joining university? Like any coding at all, big or small, doesn't matter. So if you won't mind, just type Y for yes and N for no, just to gauge the audience. Okay, we have a no. So yes. Lots of people with yes. Few with no, I think. Okay. Oh. It seems like there is somewhat an equal proportion of yes and no. That's interesting. So the fact is, when I entered college, I had no programming experience at all. I took up engineering thinking that it will help me find a job, because everybody was about, you take computer science and engineering and within 4 years, you're gonna get placed, right? And also it was a convenient excuse for me to ask for a laptop from my parents because I can install and play games. But around 4th year, we had web development as a subject. And that's when I felt like that's the thing that I'm interested in, and that helped me explore further. I want to show you some interesting statistics. This is from Stack Overflow survey 2021. And if you can see, Stack Overflow is, by the way, a website that most programmers use almost on a day-to-day basis as a reference material, or to ask questions that they may not always know when they are doing programming work. It's a really popular website, and I think most of you might be aware of this website. So they conduct surveys every year to gauge the audience of developers across the globe. And they ask a bunch of questions in the survey, like what technologies do you use? When did you start programming? What roles do you work in, etc., etc. So here's the survey results of people who've answered when did they pick up programming first. And if you can see here, a lot of people, majority of people who picked up programming are between the ages of 11 to 17 years. But then the next segment of, the largest segment of people are between the age of 18 to 24. And I guess since you're all in college, I assume most of you are all within this age group. So it's perfectly okay if you haven't programmed before, right? Now, a quick disclaimer. Now, I do have a degree, but with the exception of the degree itself, I do have a somewhat non-conventional background. But make no mistake, I worked hard, but then I also got very lucky, right? I had a lot of luck with me. And whatever I share here is going to not just be from my own experience, but also from the advice of several other people who also work in the industry, right? There are many, many of such people who are much more successful than I am. And so they may know about certain nitty-gritties more than me. So if you find now or in future that there's some aspect of this discussion that is contradicted by others, or if something which is true now but is no longer true a few years later, I would say rely on your own judgment. Okay. Now let's move on to the main agenda, which is what career options are there in software engineering. So I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the landscape of engineering. And then I'm going to specifically focus on few career roles that I'm personally comfortable with and which I've worked in earlier. Yeah. So here's a quick overview of the various roles that you would see. If you notice here, almost all the roles that I've outlined here are those that come inside web dev, right? Web development. Now there's front-end developer. What a front-end developer means, if for those of you who are not familiar, is they create functional user interfaces for the web. So they are specialized in the code that runs in a web browser, right? This role requires you to have good knowledge about the user interface of the website and also a lot of knowledge about the browser nitty-gritties, because not all browsers are the same, right? Next, we have mobile developers. Now, if you really think about it, mobile development is kind of under, I would say it's a subset of front end, but in the industry, front end usually means for the web. And so for people who work on mobile, they're specifically called mobile developers, right? So these developers, they're going to create user interfaces just like front-end developers, but for specifically mobile devices. And it's understandable why, right? Both these roles are really in demand because every company these days have at least a website and almost always an app, right? If you think about retail applications, like you might have used Flipkart or Amazon, there's a website and there's a mobile app. If you use any kind of social media, there's again a website and a mobile app, right? Every day a new application is coming out to use on our phone. Now there are some interesting statistics, right? Like social media takes 25% of all digital media consumption. Okay, and in 2020, when there was lockdowns and COVID began, US adults spent nearly 4 hours a day on their mobile phones. Okay, and in 2021, mobile phones generate most of the traffic, like 54% of the traffic just comes from mobile phones, and a certain level of traffic, like I think 42%, comes from desktops. Okay, and more than half of all video views come from mobile devices. So it's a very important part of software engineering to be any company that's creating applications for a lot of end users is bound to have roles like mobile developers, right? And then we have backend developers. So this is like all the development which is done behind the scenes, right? Not that something that's facing the user, but something that's happening away from the user, hidden from the user. That's categorized under backend. So these developers are going to write the code for servers. They're focusing on manipulating databases, what data to store, how to edit or update the data, how to delete the data, right? Different kinds of APIs. And also they have to know about the architecture of a system, right? So their work gives power to the web page or mobile application, if that makes sense. Next, we have Devops Engineer. Now this engineer it's kind of like network or system administrator, but they mostly work with the cloud. Okay, so usual cloud platforms would be AWS, which stands for Amazon Web Services, and also Google Cloud Platform. You might have heard of these cloud services. There's also Heroku. So these developers manage a lot of engineering workflow and processes to make other developers work easier, right? So they're gonna take care of frequent changes in the code version, and they may, for example, be asked to set up automated backups of the database. So you set up weekly backups of the database, and they need to, for example, set up monitoring and alerts in case some part of the service goes down. So who's responsible for that, right? So this is the primary responsibility of DevOps engineer. The full form is developer operations. Right? So companies hire these engineers when the system is too big, right? So they need someone specifically to manage and take the system responsibility completely, right? That's what a DevOps engineer does. Next, we have a QA engineer. So these are also important when it comes to testing software or finding a bug before launching the product in the market, right? Or if you're launching a new feature of an existing product in the market. So these engineers are going to develop software that tests the code that is produced by other engineers. Like, so for example, if a front-end engineer is producing code and a back-end engineer is producing their own code, the QA engineers are going to write tests that test both of their codes, right? Now, the key thing to remember here is there are different kinds of testing, okay? There is one called unit testing, which I think some of you might be aware of. Unit testing is testing individual pieces or functions of the code. Like, so if a function takes in X input, it should return Y output. So now that is done by regular developers. Like a front-end developer will write a unit test for their function, and similarly, a back-end engineer will write unit tests to test out their own functions. So the QA engineer is not going to do a unit test. What a QA engineer does is mainly write automated tests, right? So an automated test will test out an entire functionality or feature of a software. So to give you an analogy, if you, let's say, go to, and I think if some of you use Instagram perhaps, imagine that you are asked to test Instagram. What would you do? You'll go to Instagram.com, and then you're gonna click on login, the input box. You're gonna type in a username, type in a password, and click enter, right? And then you're gonna see if the page opens up, if the authentication is successful, and if the authentication is wrong, you entered a different password, it should show some error. So you're doing this manually. What a QA engineer would do is to automate this process entirely so that you don't have to do it manually every single time, right? So that's QA. So finally, we have full stack developer, and this is what I have worked for the majority of my career. Now, this role is a little hard to define because there's no real boundary, right? But the industry usage of this term, full stack, means someone who's able to work on both front end and back end. And depending on the company or the role, they may at times also do a little bit of DevOps work, and they may also even work with QA engineers to set up automation tests, right? Now, a general trend that you will see when you apply for jobs later on is that the smaller the size of the company, the more responsibilities that a full stack developer is going to handle, right? Sometimes they may do everything. And that's because startups are always trying to, like small companies, they have budget constraints, right? So instead of hiring separate engineers, like a separate front-end engineer and a separate back-end engineer, it's often just more cost effective for them to hire just like one developer and ask them to just do everything, right? So the larger the company, then the full stack developer may do only some of these roles, okay? Now, it doesn't end here though. There are few other roles as well. There are some roles that involve a lot of work with respect to data. And I think this may be of a lot of relevance to some of you. Data scientist. Now, this role appears to be the hottest job in the market right now. Why is that? Simple reason, because data science as a field helps you be data driven, okay? Data driven decisions help companies understand their customers better and in turn build great products and businesses, right? And it's easy to understand why, right? Because we live in the age of information explosion, right? So companies are always collecting different kinds of data depending upon the type of business they run. Like think about a retail store, right? What kind of data would that retail chain in e-commerce would be collecting? It could be about the kinds of products that the customers are buying over time, and their spending amounts, right? Let's say, for example, a company like Netflix, which is in the entertainment category. It could be about what shows they want to understand, what shows most of their users watch or like, and what are their demographics. Like, what do people in India watch versus what do people in Australia watch? So all of this is centered around data, right? So these are very important business decisions because it relies on a lot of intuition and also a lot of domain knowledge. So if you're in retail, if you're working with a retail company and you're a data scientist, domain knowledge is going to help you a lot here, right? Now, as data grows larger and larger, it becomes really difficult for people to make sense of it. Like you simply can't. If I give you a spreadsheet with just 10 rows, that may be easy for you to scan through it and understand it. But imagine a company like Netflix or Amazon generating like data every second, right? You're simply not equipped with the mental faculty to pour over large amounts of data and make sense out of it. So that's what data science as a field in computing helps you do. It gives you a lot more insights from the data that would otherwise go undetected, and in that helps in turn helps companies make faster decisions because computers are faster than humans are, right? So that's that role. Now, if you look below, I also have, there's something called machine learning engineer and AI engineer, which are sort of related. Now, you may have a question like, what's the difference between all these titles, right? If somebody is a data scientist, is he working on AI? Like that's a question that's often asked. So I actually read a very interesting blog post some time ago, and I forgot who the author is, and I don't know the origin of it, but that really breaks it down. The thing is, data science produces insights, okay? Machine learning produces predictions, okay? And finally, artificial intelligence produces actions. So an AI engineer would be somebody that you see like working in something like robotics or self-driving car, for example, because that AI is built for the purpose to generate some action. Whereas machine learning it's actually a subfield of artificial intelligence. So what it does is it concerns with giving computers the ability to learn without being explicitly programmed. This is again a very high paying job. According to Indeed, the average salary for a machine learning engineer in the US is more than $130,000, right? So what a machine learning engineer does is to create software that learns from the data and predicts something with it based on whatever patterns it has recognized in the data. It's different from the traditional programming that you see in front end or full stack or mobile development, because traditionally speaking, computers need to be given a very specific set of instructions. Do A, do B, do C. So they need to follow a precise set of steps, an algorithm, right? And because a computer is very good at following a sequence of steps. But machine learning engineers, they build programs that learn from data and use that to predict something. Now, what are the applications? It's a very interesting field. Say in Netflix, machine learning is used in Netflix to learn from the data that contains users' profiles based on what they have watched in the past, what videos they like, etc. And then in turn, it predicts that hey, you may be interested in watching these shows as well. So it shows you good recommendations to those users, tailoring to the very specific user, right? Google search is again a very nice example. It's tailored to show results that are most relevant to you, right? Again, a lot of ML machine learning techniques are being used behind the scenes. There's one application that I would like to show you here that I personally like is when NASA actually discovered a new planet using machine learning. Let me show you that quickly. It's a very nice, a very interesting application. So if you notice here, the newly discovered Kepler 90, a sizzling hot rocky planet that orbits its star once every 14.4 days, was found using machine learning from Google. Right, so that's something that's very cool. So the applications are enormous in this field, right? Next, we'll talk about is game developers, and as the name implies, they create games. Most of the game developers are going to specialize in different gaming frameworks or game engines like Unity. You have Unreal Engine and CryEngine. So I personally am in awe of this field because I'm into PC gaming, and it's just magical, right? The kind of creativity involved in this field. You're essentially creating a mini universe with your own rules. So if there are people who are interested in something that is super creative, then this is the field for you. Next, we have embedded systems engineer. And these folks work closely with the hardware, right? Think of common household objects like air conditioners and washing machines, and microwave ovens, right? So these developers are going to work on the real-time operating system, and they're going to write the code that actual hardware needs to function properly. So now if this hardware device is connected to the internet, then it's called IoT. An interesting thing about this field is that it requires it would help if you have good knowledge on electronics, which in turn is going to help you in related roles like a robotics engineer, right? And finally, we have developer relations, which is pretty new. One of a developer relations team is to empower developers to achieve more, right? So developer relations is exactly what it means. It's a kind of marketing that prioritizes relationships with developers. Now you may ask, why is that? Why do we need to market to developers, right? Is that even a thing? Yeah, there are very interesting reasons. One of which is, if you already know, open source software has really taken off, right? You can see tons of new open source tools coming out every year. So very often these tools have corporate sponsorship or even funding to actually build those tools, right? So just like how if your company makes a product, there are going to be end users, right? Regular users, regular people. So you have a public relations team to communicate with the general society, right? Now imagine if the company has something to offer to developers, not regular users, but developers. Then just like public relations, you are going to have developer relations, right? So if you are working in DevRel, you ensure that your company products, or maybe your company produces APIs, right? And you have also internal developers in the company. All of them, they establish a good continuous relationship with external developers, okay, through communication. So any business, organization, or individual who are offering services that could be used by a developer should have a DevRel team, right? And now this role has grown in popularity in recent years. According to Glassdoor, currently the average DevRel base pay in the US is around $90,000. That's just the average base pay, and the average annual salary for US-based DevRel is about $110,000. So top earners make over $152,000. So yeah, it's a very upcoming field. Now, this field also has, the thing to remember is it's an umbrella term, developer relations. Within this field, there are going to be different roles. Now, for the past few years or so, I have been dedicating a huge amount of my personal time as well to help fellow developers be successful and productive with the tools that they love and use. So this role typically requires a lot of passion to not just code, but also to help other people and to be comfortable with interacting with other people, right? Now, there are a few roles inside this, one that being of a technical writer. A technical writer would be somebody who creates contents like tutorials or how-tos, how to use a particular technology or APIs, etc. Whereas a developer evangelist is going to focus on getting the word out, right? That can mean speaking in conferences, attending meetups, hosting webinars like what I am doing right now, hosting hackathons as well. And there's something called developer advocate, which is more of a blend between product and marketing. So their goal is to enable developers to successfully leverage your platform. Okay. So from my experience, I mean, it's limited kind of. I've been only working in this field for a little over than a year. This field has the most overlap of all, like even more than a full stack engineer. And that's simply because of the nature of this role. A developer advocate can also do technical writing, right? They can also be involved in marketing. So it's a very loosely defined term. Okay. So let me show you some examples, I think, because that will make more sense to you. Like, what exactly am I doing on a day-to-day basis? So if you see my screen, this is the company that I work for and their website. This is a page called Insights, where the company that I work for publishes articles and any talks or meetups when they do publicly. Here's the kind of content that I published over the last 1 year or so, starting with this. Now, if you open just this one piece and look at what's the nature of the content, this was an app that the company produced internally in a hackathon. And then as a developer relations engineer, I was asked to talk a little bit about why the company made this product and how a developer or somebody who's interested to build these applications, how they go about building this, right? So if you scroll through the contents, there are things that I talk about, like the motivations behind building this. So that's the product part of it, right? You need to know, be aware of the product, why the product is going to be helpful for somebody. So that sets the context. And then you talk about how you can build such a product, what technologies have been used to build this product, and why. So as a developer relations engineer, you got to explain the tech choices that are being made and what's the rationale for making those choices. Why did we think, for example, PostgreSQL, that's the tool, one of the database that we use to build this app. It's called Cartpool. It's a community-based delivery application, right? So we used Postgres. Why did we use Postgres? What's so great about Postgres? So you have to talk about that, and then if you scroll through, you also find that there are a lot of code examples that I provide, right? Some of them are GitHub gists, some of them are just code snippets, and in fact, you may even be asked to create a demo, a working demo for the app, so that if somebody is interested to check out the app and how it works, so that is how you kind of, it's a soft marketing for developers, not kind of the hard marketing that you see on LinkedIn. It's more of a soft marketing, and to basically you're trying to help the developer, right? You're not trying to sell them something, but you're just like, hey, this may be useful for you, why don't you check it out? That's the goal of a developer evangelist. Now, as I said, it's a role that blends a lot of related roles. So one of this is technical writing, but you may also create video content as well on YouTube. I personally haven't explored much on that front, but I'm starting to, because I'm more comfortable with writing than video content. There is also, let's say, engaging with communities is the primary goal. So one good example would be Akanksha, who contacted me via LinkedIn, representing the software engineering club that you have, right? So that's that's essentially the role of a community manager. So that also comes under DevRel, right? So if you're somebody who loves to interact with the community, invite speakers, host them, that's also really important, right? So you're bringing in people or experts to your to a webinar and hosting and basically empowering these events that ultimately help developer, right? So community management is again a good area to explore. So this is what you need. It requires product and API and knowledge of whatever software tools that you use. It also needs good communication skills. And that means more or less you need to know to write well. You need to be really good and comfortable with writing. And of course, a desire to help developers, right? So that is developer relations in a nutshell. So you may see such roles, full stack, and then there's backend engineers and there are front-end engineers. So these are the demographics or the kind of roles that companies really require nowadays. There's DevOps, there's system administrators, uh, database administrators, etc. And there's engineering managers, of course, for that's a level up above the roles that we currently discussed. So engineering managers ensure that all of the developers are in sync. They basically empower developers within the team to do their job well, right? So any questions, by the way, so far? I think we discussed quite a bit, but let me know if you have any questions, something that you think that I haven't spoken about so far before we move on. Okay, Gauri's asking, can you share the link of the NASA machine learning project? Yes, let me just bring it up. Yeah, I pasted the link in the chat box for you to take a look. Do you have any questions before we move on to the next slide? Okay, cool. So moving on. Now, when you have so many fields within software engineering, the question naturally comes, like, what do I learn? And there are so many things to learn, right? And more importantly is, how do I learn? Just within one single field, let's say full stack development, if that's your goal, there's an incredible amount of stuff that you need to be well acquainted with. So is that really possible? And I think the answer really depends on a few key factors, right? One factor is, what roles do you intend to target? And secondly, what companies do you intend to target? Okay. Now, I'm going to focus a little bit on web dev. I'm going to keep aside mobile development and data science for a second. So front-end, right? What skills does a front-end developer require? So here are some common tools of the trade. HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. Some of you may be already aware of these technologies, some of you may not. These are technologies, and for now, the only technologies that can really run inside a browser. So there isn't much of a choice here between the programming language itself. HTML5 is the language that helps you create, give structure to the content of the website. CSS3 is a language that helps you style that content and make your website look pretty. And JavaScript gives functionality to your website. Now, depending on the role, there are going to be some JavaScript frameworks that you need to be aware of. Currently, one of the most popular frameworks out there, which is being used in several companies, is something called React. And there's something called Vue.js, which just came out a few years ago, and now that is also being used by several companies, most notably startups. And there's Angular. These are the big three frameworks when it comes to creating user interfaces and giving functionality to user interfaces. Now, if you look at, once again, to Stack Overflow results, and if you look at the technology section, most popular technologies, if you notice, there's JavaScript and there's HTML, CSS, and followed by Python, etc. And then you have several more, which we will talk about. But if you notice on the web framework section, React stands right on the top. Almost 44% of most developers use React.js. Followed by a few bunch of libraries. jQuery is not really a framework, but there's Angular, which is also being used. And you'll see several others over here. So it's a good technology to place your bet on if you're aiming for a front-end developer job, right? Now, these are just the tools that I'm talking about. But specifically, what knowledge do you require? One thing that I really would ask you to focus on is accessibility. What does accessibility mean? It's the practice of making your websites usable by as many people as possible, because there are going to be people with color blindness or vision loss or some disability that prevents them from using the mouse. So you need to keep those folks in mind as well when you build websites. Now, this isn't necessarily the domain of just the front end alone. There's also back end. Accessibility is something to bear in mind even for back end developers. Let me give you a good example of this. Last year, Uber was sued by the Justice Department. This happened sometime in November, and the Justice Department accused the company of discriminating against passengers with disabilities because they charged them fees when they needed more time to enter the taxi, right? So in 2016, Uber made this policy that it's going to compensate drivers who wait for more than 2 minutes for a passengers to get inside the cab. And they didn't take into account that there are going to be people with disabilities as well. They just inculcated this policy, and because of that, there was a case of discrimination launched against him, which is a very valid one, right? Because when you're launching an app that affects millions of people's lives, you need to take into account those people as well, the people who are not so fortunate to like you are, right? So, but in front end, accessibility is kind of a more higher priority because that's directly interacting with the users, right? The users, when they use the app, they're going to see the front end. The second thing would be progressive enhancement. What this means, it's basically a technique of development that allows everyone to access all the basic content and functionality of a website, uh, you know, when but when users have a better browser or a faster internet, then it's going to show them the enhanced version of the website. Hopefully that makes sense. At the very least, the website or the app should run on all browsers, whether it's an old browser or an old device which doesn't, it's not a really performant device, or whether it's a really brand new phone with a lot of processing power. The website should still be usable for everybody, right? And the good thing, if you build your applications with this in mind, is that uh, it will speed up loading, and it will help web search engines crawl the app faster, right? The reason why I'm emphasizing on all these things, like the next would be a sense of good design and user experience. This is more valuable than learning a specific JavaScript framework, because the front-end ecosystem, especially in JavaScript, is extremely chaotic. If you at least know about these things, accessibility, progressive enhancement, you have a good sense of user experience and design, that's going to help you be better and last longer in this field, rather than just by learning some JavaScript framework, because the framework may or may not be used by some company, or it may even it may lose popularity, right? So that's front end, and these are the skills that you need. Now, moving on, there's backend developer as well. Now, this is the bare minimum knowledge for a backend developer, which is you need to be able to build web services, right? A web service is simply like when you go to a website, where's the data coming from? It's not a static data, right? It's something, some server is serving the data. That's what building a web service means, right? You also need to know about HLD, or high level design, because there are going to be a lot of moving pieces. There's going to be the database component, the web services component. There's going to be business logic. The business logic is going to access the database, do something with the data, and format it, and then send it. So a high level design, knowledge of high level design is going to really help you. You also need to know about databases. That's the minimum. Now, in databases, there are going to be several kinds of database. There's going to be SQL database, which I think you picked up in college. I think you have SQL as a subject. Do you have it? If you may just quickly say yes or no, or have you done any kind of programming with it? Okay, not yet. Oh, in school. Oh, that's good. Oh, I see. Oh, that's interesting. You guys picked up SQL in school. Wow, I didn't know that. That's good. So, SQL is it's actually a language, but the thing is that a lot of databases use SQL as the standard for interacting with the database, right? And there are several databases that adhere to the SQL format. One of them being MySQL, okay? The other being Postgres. Currently, these two are the most popular, but there are several more that are just coming up, and they all have their pros and cons. There are also databases which are called non-relational database. Those would be something like MongoDB. So let me just show you what do I mean. So if you go to web frameworks and technologies, if you notice, MySQL is currently being used by most of software professionals, followed by Postgres, followed by SQLite. SQLite is kind of a lightweight version of SQL. all these three databases on the top are relational databases. Now, if you notice below, there's MongoDB. MongoDB was the database that I used first professionally because it was very easy to pick it up. There was not a bunch of stuff that I need to learn. But it's a completely different kind of database, right? And then over here below, you'll see Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is a database that specializes in search, as the name suggests. If you want to read about Elasticsearch, there's a blog that I just published last week, how to use Elasticsearch. That's the thing. If you notice on Amazon or Flipkart, there's a search box on the top, right? And if you search something, it's able to quickly run something and fetch the data and then show it, right? How is that possible? So that's being powered by Elastic, not specifically in Amazon, but Elasticsearch helps you make such things possible. It's great for powering search experiences. And it's not just limited to Amazon and Flipkart. There's a ton of applications in this. So Elasticsearch is a non-relational database. It's not like SQL or MySQL. Okay. What do we have next? Yeah, we have Cassandra, which is again a non-relational database. It's typically used in when you have a lot of data, like big data. You might have heard of this term called big data. These fields typically use databases that are built to scale. So when I'm saying that you need to know about databases, you don't need to know about everything that I just described, but you need to know at least one, right? My suggestion would be to pick relational database and master that, because that has applications even in data science as well, right? So I would suggest either MySQL or Postgres if you are interested in picking up databases. So you need to know at least one out of this. And finally, you have cloud platforms. How many of you have heard of this term called cloud? I'm really curious because when I was in fourth year, I had no idea what was cloud. No idea. We had this subject called cloud computing and I had no idea what it was until I started working. So how many of you have heard of this thing called cloud? If you can just type yes or no. Oh, wonderful. Nice. Wow, almost everybody knows about cloud. Okay. Seems like, I guess it's become quite popular. I think even my mom and dad probably know what is cloud now. Yeah, so you need to know about at least one cloud platform. The more, of course, the better, but a good place to begin with. The easiest cloud platform that I personally have used is Heroku. It's very easy. Like the user interface is like just click buttons and deploy, right? The next one I would suggest would be AWS, Amazon Web Services. When I'm saying cloud, you need to know how to deploy the application so that it's accessible over the internet. That's what a cloud is, right? A cloud is just a machine, a computer, which is accessible via the internet, essentially speaking, at the bare fundamental of it, right? So AWS is again a good cloud service platform for you to get acquainted with. And there would be, there's also Google Cloud. Unlike a front-end engineer who's mostly going to work on only a few set of languages, there's HTML and there's CSS, there's JavaScript, right? At least for now. There's also WebAssembly coming up, but I'm not sure when that is going to take off. But for now, these are the most commonly used technologies. There's not really a lot of room for it yet in front end. But in back end, you have a lot of tools, lot more tools at your disposal. So number one, which I would recommend for you if you're just trying to get acquainted with backend, would be Node.js. Why? Because if you just know JavaScript, which is being used in the front end, you can also write backend programs in JavaScript using Node.js. Okay, Node.js is simply the browser runtime environment, but outside the browser. It's no more on the browser. You can now install it. The runtime environment can be installed in just a Linux machine, right? Python is again another choice to go for, because Python can be used for a lot of things to create web services, but also that is the language currently when it comes to data science and machine learning. All the major open source tools in machine learning or deep learning, right? TensorFlow, you might have heard of that. You might have heard of PyTorch or Keras. Most of these, the ecosystem around data science, machine learning is kind of centering around Python, right? The next one would be Go, which is a language that was launched within Google, which is really great if you're worried about things like performance. It's not to say that the first two languages are very slow or anything like that, but Go is very performance centric, and a lot of open source tools are built using Go because it also enables you to be your application to be cross-platform. Like you can just compile your program and run it anywhere. That's Go. And then there's Java, which is still being used because it's a very battle-tested language. Right? There's a ton of documentation around Java, and again, you can do a lot of things with Java. Creating web servers is part of that. As I said earlier, you don't have to pick all of these languages, but you need to be sure of that you know at least one language, right? So one of this and one of this on the left, okay? Now coming to full stack. As I mentioned, full stack developer is a very loosely defined term, right? This is what I like to think about when it comes to full stack developer. It's somebody who has skills that are shaped like the letter T, okay? The vertical bar on the letter T, that represents the depth of the knowledge that you have, the depth of the skills and expertise in one single field, whereas the horizontal bar is the ability to collaborate across disciplines with other experts in whatever other areas that they are in, right? As a full stack developer, you need to be skilled in at least very skilled in at least one area. So that can be either front end or that can be either back end as well, okay? But you also need to have sufficient knowledge, maybe not be an expert, but at least enough knowledge that you're able to quickly switch and work cross domain. That's what it means. So in the industry, as of now, the usual job requirements that I see for a full stack developer is you need to know at least one backend programming language or an ecosystem. It could be Python, or it could be Node.js, right? You need to know at least one database, just like a backend developer. You need to know either PostgreSQL or MySQL, or you need to know MongoDB. You also, on the other hand, need to know about React, about HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and some web framework. It could be React, it could be Angular, or it could be Vue.js. Those are the kind of roles that you would typically see, the requirements that you would typically see for a full stack developer. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, moving on. So now coming to the next subject. How do you create a profile? Like you have all this information now, you know what to learn. But how do you actually build a profile that demonstrates your skills? My learning was a little bit chaotic, okay? the first language that I picked up was C and C++ in college. What did you pick up, by the way, in college? Did you pick up C first, or did you pick up some other language? What was your first language? Okay, there's C, C++. Right. C++, okay. So it seems like the college curriculum hasn't really changed much even after I graduated long back. So most of you are still having C as the first, C or C++. Okay. Python in school. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, a lot of people are learning Python in school. Maybe because I think it's because it's really easy to get started with Python. The syntax is a little more cleaner, perhaps. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so I also picked up C and C++ in college. But when I really think about it, I found most of the subjects that I learned dry in computer science. I don't know if you find it like that. I would love to know if you find it a little bit boring, or do you find things to be really interesting? I mean, sure, I found certain things interesting, but none of them were interesting enough to keep me occupied for very long, right? In C, for example, for those of you who have learned C, you might be able to relate to it. It took me a lot of time to just understand what are pointers, right? And for those of you who have RDBMS, standing for Relational Database Management System, I had no idea what does that mean. Until the point when I had web development in 4th year, and it just clicked. Hold on a second. I want to show you my first program in Webdev. My first feeling after I wrote this program was, hey, this is so cool. It's not very complicated. And the whole thing just took like 20 lines of code, right? And it didn't feel boring for me because there's an immediate feedback that I'm getting. I'm writing some program and I'm immediately seeing something happening on my screen, right? So this was my hook. And then I started to learn more and more. And then I evolved from that program to a slightly more complex program. And then I created a website, right? So what I'm trying to say here is, there are a lot of people who do start out with C++ or Java, and they are still writing it. I had people like that in my college, but not all of us are like that, right? For some people, you really need to understand what is the application of why you're learning something. So that's why I say the most effective way to learn all the skills that we spoke about earlier is to first begin by learning the whole game. Okay, start by showing off how to create a complete working application, right? That does something, if you are somebody who is interested in full stack, okay? And learn always through examples. Ensure that there's always a context and a purpose that you can understand intuitively. There's a good essay that I would like to show you. It's called A Mathematician's Lament. Okay, I'm gonna paste the link in the chat box. In this essay, it describes a world where small children, they're not allowed to listen to or play music until they've spent like many years mastering music notation and theory and spending classes understanding each key in the keyboard. And similarly, it also describes there's an art class where students are just learning about colors, but they're not actually allowed to paint until college. So that sounds a little absurd, right? But the reality is that is how programming is being taught still in college. we're still in the phase where we have to do a lot of rote memorization, and we're kind of learning fundamentals that are disconnected, that we think will have value later. But the thing is, most of people just quit, right? And we lose motivation because we don't really know how are we applying these concepts. Hence the reason why I suggest, if you want to really learn something, right, begin by seeing a project. Okay, take some example of a project. It could be something like an e-commerce website that you personally like, or it could be something like Uber, for example. Pick a project and try to just go about building it. In that process, you are going to learn the whole game of engineering, right? You're going to learn all the moving pieces without making things unnecessarily complicated. Okay, this is the reason why most people who enter web dev, they begin with front-end engineering, because there's a feedback loop, and then slowly it's easier for them to transition into being a full stack developer, because when they're building a website, the questions naturally come, right? Oh, there's this website here, there's a bunch of content. Oh, where's the data coming from? Okay, who's going to give the data? Okay, that's why we need a server, right? Okay, now how do we store the data? Oh, this is why we need database. Okay, so that is much more effective than just going about learning fundamentals. I'm not saying fundamentals are bad, but I think if you are in the phase where you just want to explore, which I think most of you are in that phase, I think this is how you should go about doing it. Okay, now, yeah, and also have fun when you build this. So let me show you some examples of projects that you can get started with. Okay, this is a nice resource that you can refer to. I'll paste the link in the Zoom chat, where you can see a list of applications, like what you can build basically when you have time on your weekends. There's calendar application, GitHub Explorer app for finding interesting code, note-taking app, Slack widgets, meme generator, book club, Twitter web client. There's OpenStreetMap custom UI. So there are a bunch of projects that you can just scroll through. A medium.com clone, which is Medium is a blogging application, face tagger. So these are some interesting projects that will help you learn the fundamentals of web development by project-based learning. Okay, so I'm going to paste the description, the link over here. You can also refer my website. Yeah, I have also a bunch of blogs that will help you build applications. Yeah, these two are there. How to build your own Clubhouse. Clubhouse is a social audio application that was launched like a couple of years back. There's also a bunch of blogs on data science and machine learning if you want to get started with that. And you also have this blog on how to build your own Uber for X app. So if you are interested in these, which I'll paste the link as well. Feel free to check these links out, and this will really help your portfolio because you're going to learn a bunch of things in the process of building it. Okay, so that's a little bit about learning. Now, moving on, I think we've crossed over an hour. A little bit on this subject, like what should a profile contain at the minimum? Okay, at the very minimum, it will really help you if you have a portfolio website like the one that I just shared. That's an example of my portfolio website. What does a portfolio website contain? It's going to contain a little description about you, and it may contain the side projects that you've built, and Also links to your professional social media, right? You may have a profile on LinkedIn or angel.co, or you may have a profile on LeetCode, right? So ideally speaking, your portfolio website should contain links where, if somebody is coming to your website, they should be able to go there and click on LinkedIn and see your LinkedIn profile. GitHub is a really important link to have, because by the way, how many of you have heard of GitHub? If you can just type yes. Great. Cool. Right. So GitHub is great because you can have GitHub as your repository for any side projects that you build. The links that I shared earlier, the list of side projects, pick one of them and focus on, pay special attention to certain things. One is how to install your project, right? Pay special attention to the project description, okay? Because that is the first thing that some recruiter or somebody in the hiring team is going to notice, right? And they want to know whether you pay attention to detail or not. It is fine that you don't have to build an enormous set of features. It's okay. You don't have to build very complicated features. But something like a user interface, a backend, and a database, right? And how you have structured your code. Right? Is it clean? Okay. Is your Git commits, are they good descriptions? Do they have good description of the commit that you made in your code? Okay. And also the project README. The README file is going to contain the description of your project. And that is the number one thing that recruiters are going to see, right? And if possible, if you can deploy your side project somewhere on the cloud, you can use AWS. I've used Heroku a lot because it's just more convenient that way. And if you can provide that link to the side project where it's a working example, if you can provide that link in your profile, that's an additional bonus, right? So side projects are a good way. You don't need to have a chunk of those side projects, but around 2 or 3 will be good enough. I think you should not have more than that, unless you are really, of course, interested and you want to continue learning. Then of course you can keep doing it, but that's sufficient for showing in your portfolio, right? Now blog posts are once again important because a lot of developers have side projects. Like now there are a bunch of developers, okay? Out of 100, there may be only about 50 people who may have side projects. Now, if you want to stand out amongst those 50 people as well, I would say then write 1 or 2 blog posts if possible. And it doesn't have to be as well polished or as extensive as the ones that I showed to you. A good example of how to begin writing blog posts is whenever you're building your side projects, you may come across several questions or doubts, right? And if you have those questions or doubts, there's a good chance that many other developers are also going to have the same doubts, right? So keep taking small notes. Every time you're building something, you got stuck somewhere and you looked up some solutions, you tried 3 things and one of them worked, make a note of it. Keep making notes as you progress. Now you have a template which you can just refine, convert it into a blog and put it out, right? That's how I got started with my first blog. And I actually managed to publish it in Free Code Camp. Let me just show you that quickly. Yeah, so this blog is something that I published on Pre-Code it's a tool called Webpack. So I was stuck once when I was using this tool, and I was trying a bunch of things. None of them really worked. And then I asked some questions on Stack Overflow, and then I got some solutions. I thought, okay, let me just put it out there, because this technology was relatively new at that time, and there were a lot of questions surrounding the topic, and the documentation at times isn't simply sufficient, right? So I just put this out there. It's not a very well polished blog post, but it's useful, right? And more importantly, it shows that you're familiar with these things. Okay, so don't be afraid to get started with blogging. One important thing to remember in mind is when you are putting out these posts, you may come across people who don't agree with you. Right? There will be people who go to your blog, read it, and they don't like it, and they're gonna say it's a dumb blog, right? So as somebody who's aiming to, get into DevRel, which has a lot of writing work to do, you need to have a thick skin, right? You should ignore the criticisms that are not actually criticisms; they're just noise, right? And as long as you personally feel that I've written something and I think it's going to be valuable, so I'll put it out there. If you truly believe that, then I would say go for it. Okay. Now, where do you publish a blog? That's an important question. Okay. Um, it's a tricky one, by the way, because I may as well say create your own website and put it out there, but that seems a little too much of effort, at least in the beginning, right? So a good website to begin with would be something called this. It's called dev.to. You can just create an account over here. It's a developer community, and you can see that almost every day a lot of developers are publishing content on JavaScript, Webdev, beginners and tutorials, etc. This is a good place to begin with if you are not exactly sure how will your blogging habit, is it going to last, or you just want to just test the waters. So this is a good site to put your blog. Another one that I might recommend is this one. It's called Hashnode. Okay, this is recommended by the founder of Pre-Code himself, right? So you can start a blog, and more importantly, you can buy a domain name in Namecheap or GoDaddy, and you can connect it with this blog, so that it's not going to have hashnode.com URL, it's going to have your URL, which I think is pretty great, right? So that's the other thing that I want to mention about having a portfolio. It's really useful if you can buy a domain name under your own name, if possible, and connect it to your portfolio. Now, about portfolio, what do you use for a portfolio? That's also a question, right? A good starting point is something called GitHub Pages. Okay. So GitHub Pages is a really easy and convenient way to create a portfolio website for you. Or even if you have a project, you want to create a portfolio website for the project itself, that's also possible in GitHub Pages. And you can connect your domain name with your GitHub Pages URL, so that you don't have pages.github.com, you have your own domain name, right? So create these things are really valuable when it comes to having a profile that is going to eventually attract companies. Okay. Next, there will be this question, I think, certifications and degrees, do they actually matter or not? Okay. What do you think? Do you think certifications matter, or do you think degrees matter? What do you say? Type Y for yes. Okay. Okay. Most people are saying yes. Okay. I was just overhearing a call from my roommate just last week, and they were discussing about having a education budget for all employees. So one of them suggested that, hey, we want to do this certification, and you are saying yes, but a lot of people seem to disagree with that. They say like, no, certifications are useless. Companies don't care about certifications, right? Now, what is the right answer? You say yes. If you're gonna go and ask somebody else out there in the industry, they might say no. Like, nobody cares about certificates. It's just a piece of paper, right? And nobody cares about degrees. That's also something that they're gonna say. The It's actually the right answer is it depends. Okay, let me expand on that. Why? There are no absolute answers. Like, you can't say that certifications are entirely useless, degrees are useless. Neither can you say degrees are absolutely fundamental to getting a job. You can't say there are no absolutes here, because ultimately we're dealing with people, right? And people, when you deal with people, you deal with a lot of uncertainties, a lot of ifs and buts. Okay, what I like to personally think about this topic of certifications and degrees is that it's not like a yes or a no answer. It's more about signals, right? First of all, why are companies even asking? If a company wants to know whether you have a degree or not, they're not really looking for the degree. They're trying to understand what does the degree signify, right? Same to do with certifications. The certification, what does it signal to the company, right? So you can think of all these things in terms of signals. All of these signals individually are weak signals, okay? But put together, they're gonna create a strong signal that puts you in the spotlight, right? That tells the company a story about you, okay? For the most part, degree depends on the university, right? I don't know how everybody just cribs about the universities that they are in, right? Most people are not having exactly favorable opinions when it comes to their universities, and that's okay, right? So this is really a question of which university you are in. This is the reason why you see graduates from IIT. Now, IIT signals something really strong, more so than regular colleges, right? Because that has a certain brand value attached to it, right? So this is why you see people graduating from IITs get, really handsome package right after graduation, or they get favored more than regular people for an important position, or maybe to even receive funding, right? So depends on the university, right? Certifications, there are certifications that are really valuable, right? Depends on the quality of the certification. There are a lot of certifications that are absolutely worthless, right? I've seen I come across a bunch of them in sites like Udemy, for example. Those are very, very average quality certifications, so it doesn't make sense to go and do that. But think about a certification like AWS developer. There are some certifications that are offered by AWS itself, right? Solutions architect is a good example. Now, those certificates, if you do, they're going to signify something to the company that yes, you have expertise in this domain, right? So those things are valuable. A good certification, if you're considering to do one, is once again, I will refer to Free Code Camp. Go to freecodecamp.org. Yep, learn to code, build projects, earn certifications, and this is all for free. And there are a bunch of certifications if you scroll over here: responsive web design, algorithms and data structures, front-end development, data visualization, etc. Another one that I have done is from Coursera. So Coursera has a bunch of certificates, and some of these certificates are offered by Google and several other companies. So you can see that Coursera is a great resource to learn programming, and not just programming, but also other things that you may be interested in. So yeah, you can see that there are certificates offered by Google, IBM, Intuit. So you don't have to do a bunch of it. Again, the key is to have a good balance of topics, right? Maybe do one certification on web design, okay? Do one on data science if possible, right? So that's how I would balance it, so that my portfolio shows a broad range of skills, right? I have something to show for each skill that I have mentioned that I know, right? Be it may be via side project or via certifications, okay? If you find that one of these signals, you can't really do much about it, let's say your university, you can't really do much about the university. You often find out how the university is like only after you get into the university, right? So if one of the signal is weak, make sure that it's compensated by something else. Give out a really strong signal in some other area. It could be side projects, right? If you have less side projects, or if you have a degree from not so great college, then your work experience need to be really, really good. That should then signify that yes, you indeed know things that you're talking about. This is ultimately what companies look for, right? They're not looking for just one individual thing. They're looking at you overall as a person. What do you have to offer? Are you ultimately going to bring value or not? Okay, hopefully that makes sense. How to evaluate job offers? Okay, depends. One is that there are multiple things to consider here as well. One is the type of company. Should you join a startup or should you join a big corporate? Tell me how many of you want to join a startup. Say yes or no if you want to join a startup or not. Okay, somebody raised hand. Cool. Nice. Depends on the future prospects. Yes, totally. Yes. Why are you coming to a startup? Is it to learn or to make money, right? I think if you're coming to a startup with the intention that you are gonna get a lot of stock options in the startup, and when the startup does well, you're gonna get rich. That's not exactly how it's gonna work out, because most startups, even if they give you stock options, it's very unlikely that they're gonna succeed. I have been in a startup that actually got shut down, right? And I personally thought that it was like a really great place to work with. It ultimately got shut down, lack of funding and other reasons, right? This can happen a lot. So the main advantage in working for a startup is that you actually get to learn quite a lot. But again, depends on the company, right? So it's always on a case-to-case basis. I'm just saying, generally speaking, you get to learn a lot. But again, in the startup world, the learning can come to a stop, right? So whatever skills that we spoke about, front end, you joined as a front-end engineer. In the early initial months, 2 to 3 months, you might have a lot to learn. Ultimately, the learning curve is going to go up, and then it's going to stagnate for a while, right? So don't go under the expectation that throughout the time you're in the startup, there's just going to be always learning, okay? And the other important thing to remember in mind is that, at least in India, if you're working in startups, it's really hard to come across one where there's a good work-life balance, right? Most of them are going to tell you that they have flexible timings. Unfortunately, it's mostly for the company's benefit, not yours. You're going to see people working late. I was working so long hours during COVID. My work hours actually went up quite a bit. I thought that I can actually wind up the day because I'm not commuting, but the work went on till 10 p.m. in the night, right? So this depends on a good criteria to measure is look at the company profile, look at the product that they make, and try to understand in what stage they're in. Are they like a little, really too small startup, or are they somewhat in a stage where they have enough people to build and take responsibility, right? That's one. Now, corporates, big corporates, there are a bunch of them. The kinds of companies that usually come to campus placements, they are going to be big corporates, right? Tata Consultancy Services and Accenture and Infosys. I personally recommend joining these companies only when you've already learned a few skills. Okay, these are not like bad companies to work. They can be actually good, but if you're joining them as a fresher, you don't really have a control over what projects that they assign you to, and it's still the case that you might not get any project at all. You might undergo training for a few months, and then you're just not having any projects to do. You're just collecting a paycheck. So if you're targeting these companies, it's best, generally speaking, to join them when you're a little more senior. You join them as a senior developer or a project manager, then that's a good thing. Now, coming to even bigger ones like Google and Amazon, they're of course great. And I personally think you should just, if you get an opportunity to work in Google or Amazon or Flipkart, I would say go for that instead of prioritizing for startup. I mean, if you can crack it, awesome, right? Because you can always join a startup later on, right? So go for, if you have those ambitions to work for these companies, great. You should absolutely consider that, and I feel you should even prioritize it much more than startups if that's the goal. Okay. The second thing is that when you're evaluating job offers is that at least pick two out of three. Okay. One is growth in skills, one factor. Another one is salary and benefits. The third is work-life balance. Okay. Any job offer should ideally contain 2 out of 3 of these criteria. The reason is that if you're going to grow up in skills, but you don't have any salary or benefits or work-life balance, you are going to burn out. This has happened to me personally. The reason that I mentioned I was on a career break is because I suffered a severe burnout, and I thought the burnout will last for maybe 2 months and then I'll apply for a job. That didn't exactly turn out that way. It lasted for 2 years. I just lost the capacity to work. I mean, there was a time when I didn't even want to open the laptop. It was that crazy, right? So you really need to keep in mind your mental health as well. Okay. Or if you're in the mindset of, I don't really care about work-life balance, at least ensure that you are getting compensated well and you have a growth in the company. You're learning valuable skills so that when you move away from the company, your skills are still valued. Okay. I wish I could go on, but I think we're already going to complete 2 hours. I'm just going to quickly wrap it up. So the last thing being, if you want to level up in your career, you absolutely need to consider financials and promotions. And the way to do that is you need to be a good negotiator. Okay. Why am I emphasizing on negotiation is that because there's very little actionable advice out there on negotiation, because deep down many people believe that negotiation is something that can't be explained. It's something that people can do, some people can do and other people can't. There's no real way to break it down. That's not true. Okay, negotiation is a skill that can be learned just like learning tech skills. Okay, it's not particularly hard to understand. Okay, why am I emphasizing on this is because it's not just going to help you get a better paycheck, but it's going to help you be a better engineer. Yes, it's going to help you be a better engineer. You know why? Because when you're working in a team, right, you're not just going to be a single individual building an entire thing. You're going to be working in a team, and there's going to be frequent interactions with other co-workers, right? Now, when you're interacting with people, there is bound to be discussion and often disagreements as well. You might say we should use approach A, the other person might say we should use approach B because that is better. So there is going to be tug of war between people in the company, right? So if you know to negotiate, you will be in a position to better explain your tech choices, why you think that certain A decision is better than another decision B. That is something that you need to communicate well, and you owe it to yourself and to your team to make your case. Okay, so this is why negotiation is not just about I want a better offer, I want more money. That's not what it is about. It's a way to approach a middle ground that makes both you and the other party happy, right? So that's what it means to be a good negotiator. Now I can go into more detail. If you're really interested about negotiation, let me know in the comments, in the chat box. And if enough people are interested, we can always talk about it in more length, because this is going to take an entire topic. How to navigate interviews, what are the things to say to an interviewer. There are going to be some trick questions that you will be asked during interviews, and it takes a certain level of a certain mindset to approach that. Okay, and finally, staying future proof, especially if you're a full stack developer. As I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty chaotic ecosystem, personally speaking, because JavaScript as a language has a lot of pitfalls. Frameworks are coming and going. So how do you learn something that's not going to go obsolete in the next few years? I think that you should, maybe now or maybe later in the future, start to learn technologies that are going to be a lot more valuable in future. One of them being data science and machine learning. Project management is a good skill to learn. Design, right? UX design, product design. These things are relatively stable. The tools around this ecosystem is relatively not going to change as much as in front end or back end. Okay, so as you're leveling up, try to also get into fields that are outside the full stack domain. Get into UX or UI, learn a bunch of stuff on data science and machine learning, and I think that will be a good way for you to stay relatively future proof and for you to transition at some point. Okay, so that is where I'll stop. Any questions do you have for me so far? Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to answer them.
So one student is raising their hand. You can unmute and ask a question.
Yeah.
Good evening, sir. Sir, actually, I'm a first semester student at BTech IT in MIT University. So, one question that I had is that you mentioned 4 criteria of like that was really insightful that the companies look over, like your certifications, your degree, and your work experience and all. So, if you are weak in one of those sections, like what would you advise the student to work strongly upon, like one segment you are weak, and out of the rest of the three, which one should a student should focus more on? That was my question.
Cool. Let me just quickly go back to the slide. Um, so if I understand correctly, you're talking about this one?
Yes,
The
sir.
one? Okay. So as an example, if I have to give my own example, uh, my degree is not something that I'm entirely proud of, because it's a college that, to put it very politely, there are some things that I would have liked it to be better in certain respects. But not only that, I also didn't have a great academic record in college. I had, in fact, 3 backlogs, okay, in first year of engineering. So I was really concerned. I had similar concerns like how you said. Like, my degree is not so great. I was not even allowed to sit in certain placements because my GPA was not exactly matching how much ever they demanded. So what I tried to focus instead was the bottom two, which is side projects and work experience. Okay. Um, so I thought, let me at least build some projects that will compensate for my, not so stellar record in academics. Okay. So those are the kind of things that I showed earlier. Okay. Personally, I feel you should have these side projects, even if you are from an absolutely phenomenal university. You should still have side projects with you. Okay. Uh, it's okay to have 2 or 3, but ensure, as I said earlier, that you not only just put some code out there on GitHub, but actually help the recruiter or whoever is visiting your profile understand what the project is about. Why did you build it? What was the motivation behind it? Okay. I really doubt that anybody is going to go into the actual code and review your project. That typically isn't something that I have seen happen. Okay, they just see, I give them the project link, they just go there and see, oh, there's a project. Oh, this is what it does. So what I do is I even put up screenshots. Okay, so let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. If you go to my profile on GitHub, so yeah, the first thing that you see is my GitHub profile, where I've spoken to some length about who I am, etc. This is a nice feature that they've added in GitHub. You should really try it out. You can create your own page on GitHub. But if you scroll below, let me pick the project where I built an Uber clone. Now notice here, the first thing that they see is some attractive image, and then followed by a link to the blog that I wrote in order to build this. So not only did I build side project, but I also wrote a blog piece describing how I built it. So that's a good way to address both side projects and the blog part of your portfolio, right? You build one project and then you talk about it. Okay. And then there's followed by tech stack, how to install, how to run. Okay. Now they're not actually going to run this, but it gives them a good understanding, like that you as a developer value technical documentation, you value presentation as well. You're not just writing code that's going to be obscure in some repository nobody has heard of, right? And the good part is, if your documentation is really good, more people will actually start it. So you can see that there are a lot of people who start this project as well. Let me show you another example of a project that I have now archived it. So I'm not really working on it anymore because it's difficult to find time out of work. Hold on a second. Yeah, so this is a open source project that I started in the very early days of React.js. And I basically wrote a bunch of components in React, and then I provided documentation. So, which was really helpful for people who wanted to understand how to use my project, right? So you can see, this is the kind of documentation that I wrote, okay? Followed with examples and screenshots and code snippets, etc. Right? This communicates a lot of things about you, which will be potentially of immense value to somebody who's visiting your profile. And it is helpful because your project can go really popular if you make the kind of documentation that I have here, right? So if you find yourself weak in one area, you can absolutely compensate for that by focusing on these other aspects, right? I would rate certifications and degrees slightly lower than side projects and work experience, okay? So that's what I did. I built side projects, and then I thought, okay, my side projects are probably getting strong, but that's not enough, right? I still don't have work experience. Okay, when I first started out, nobody has work experience when they start out. I don't have a great academic record. I don't have much of certifications also. I didn't have really free code camp or at least I'd never heard of free code camp or several of the boot camps that we have today. So I thought, let me use my side project to apply for a job in startups, because startups, and that time I didn't really care about how big startup it is or how small, okay? I thought I need work experience. So I focused on what are they building? What is the startup building? What is the tech stack that they are using? And do they have, any hopes for the future? Like, they're not going to immediately shut down. But despite your best efforts, sometimes that can still happen, right? Over a period of time, you build your work experience, okay? Then these two are gonna be more than enough to compensate for any lack of something else in any other area. Hopefully this answers your question. Do you want me to expand on anything else?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I can focus on side projects. Yeah, sure. That was really insightful. Thank you.
Anyone else? You have any other questions to ask me?
So I think we can wind up the session now.
Sure. All right. So thank you all. And I want to just quickly share a link to a Google form. If you would be so kind to just fill it up. It's a very short one. I'm just gonna ask you how you felt in general about this webinar. Was it useful or not? And if you in future would like another session, maybe on negotiation or maybe on interview preparation, because honestly,
Yes,
it is a little tough to cover everything.
Yes, so we surely look forward to a future session with you. This was really insightful and useful session. So thank you very much for being here.
Cool. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the week.
Sure, sir.